Hey, welcome to chapter 18. So this one is Daniel. We meet every week with a small group, but nobody can make it this week, so I thought I'd do a video, mainly because I like to hear myself talk now. I think it's good to kind of summarize these things for me, so I thought I'd make a video, and if it's useful to you, then great. The way we started these lessons last time, which didn't necessarily go over well, is we answered the questions from the study guidebook. I've got a copy of it around here somewhere, but this is the questions that are in there, and they're designed to see if you kind of have the first level of knowledge, which is like just understanding or knowledge, I guess they also call it, of what these chapters are in. So this is about the book of Daniel, right? So it's an abbreviated version of Daniel. It's 12 pages instead of 12 chapters. But we have some questions in here that you can kind of think through. So special diet request. So this is from chapter 1. What they ask for? They actually ask for special food and water. So I guess it's got to be C then. So vegetables and water. I guess they didn't know much about fruits in the time. But instead of wine and instead of meat sacrificed to idols or dedicated to idols, they wanted food that was appropriate for their law. Keep in mind their law was different from ours. What amazed the officials when Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fiery furnace. So this would be chapter 3. You can see I've been spending a lot of time in the Bible version of this. Not a hair on their heads was singed. That's true. Their robes weren't scorched. That was true. They didn't smell like smoke. It's got to be all of them, right? So they believed. They trusted, and in this particular instance, God chose to be with them in this world as well, right? So God's promises that He will always be with you as you go through trials and tribulation. But for many of us, the way He will be there with us is through death and rising again, right? So don't think that just because God is always with you, that God is going to choose to shield you on the earth. But that is, of course, what happened with these three. We'll talk about their names here in a little bit. Why was Daniel thrown into the den of lions? So what did he do wrong? So he refused to bow down to the golden idol. That's a trick, right? So that's what was true of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But that's not Daniel. He prayed to God 3 times a day. He did do that, right? And jealous enemies brought false accusations against him. They actually brought true accusations. They just brought to the king that he was praying to God. So it's got to be B there. And so that one will come up in, see if I can do this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Chapter 6, I think, is where that one's going to come up at. Oh, bonus question. There's 4. Which prophet predicted the return of the Israelites from captivity? This is kind of a trick because it's actually from kind of the last chapter. Jeremiah was the one who did this, and we'll see that today's stuff as well. So there's a lot of themes going on in Daniel. It's an amazing scroll. It's really crazy. And one of the big things that it's kind of like about is the sovereignty of God. So the sovereignty of God, what's that word, fancy word mean? So it basically just means that God is in control. So even when things seem out of control, so our world seems pretty out of control, I think we'll all agree to that. God's still in control, right? Is kind of the idea. And God is aware of and guiding earthly events, and He can choose to guide things and direct them in ways that follow His will. So I know that it feels like things are out of control and it feels like it's hopeless, or some people feels like you've got to do everything you can to fix everything, but like you should have peace in the sovereignty of God, that there's nothing you could do to change the world. It's got to be God. So he's in control of the big and the little, and He's in charge of the big and the little in your life. And one of the ways this book showed that is that there's a lot of predictions of saying what's going to happen to an extreme like we have never seen before in the Bible. So this is one of the themes, is showing the sovereignty of God. Let's build up towards the verse of the day. So this is a thing I stole from Tim Mackey, because I steal everything. There's nothing here in this whole slide deck that's original. It's just collections of different pieces I've seen, right? And so this one I thought was really good, so I had to do this. So he says, imagine you're at a Star Wars convention. People are dressed up like R2D2 C3PO is crazy, right? Like, I don't know if you've ever seen pictures or gone to a convention like this, but people are out of control. People know the movies forwards and backwards. Just every little thing is memorized, right? Let's say you're at this convention and you walk up to somebody and you say, "I am your father," right? And so if you were to say that to somebody there, it would be really significant because of the context, right? So you would be making a tremendous statement with these 4 words, right? If you know the movies, I'm assuming you do, you're speaking as if you are Darth Vader, right? So it's kind of saying, "I am Darth Vader, and you are Luke," right? So you are Luke Skywalker, and it identifies me, it identifies you, and it says where we're at in the story, right? So this is the end of the episode 4. Luke, I'm not going to do it, right? And so it's very significant because of the context that everyone at this convention would know. And so words have meaning because of context. I mean, the fact that they're in English is meaningful, right? So that's how we communicate. So it's words are just a combination of what they say and then their context. And that's really important in Scripture as well. And so this is not the verse of the day. This is background information. Interestingly, it's futuristic background information. So this is in the time of Christ. So this is taken from the Gospel of Mark. It's in all the Gospels, but I chose to grab it from Mark here because this is the one I found first. So this is Caiaphas when he's questioning Jesus. So this is before they go to Pilate. And so the high priest, that's Caiaphas in this case, he asks him, "Are you the Messiah?" Right? And he clarifies it even more, the Blessed One, the Son of the Blessed One, right? So the Son of God. So he's asking him, "Are you the Messiah? Like, are you going to make that claim?" And he wants a yes/no answer, right? He wants yes or he wants no. And Jesus' answer, it is a yes, right? He says, he's expecting a yes, I am. He doesn't say the word yes. He just says, I am, Jesus said. So that's kind of his first answer, which is a little bit of a cheeky answer and a reference to something God did with Moses. And then the next one says, and you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One, coming on the clouds of heaven. So we read that with no context, right? So we're kind of like, we read I am, we know what that part means. Like, it means yes, right? And then he says, you will see the Son of Man. So Son of Man, so I guess he's saying he's God, right? Sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One. And so with no context, we can kind of see what he means. But the high priest saw even more. So 63 here, the high priest tore his clothes, right? Like, why do we need any more than this? You've heard the blasphemy, right? So like, that was, to him who really understood context well, that was an extreme statement, right? That was not I'm not going to answer your question. That was like an extreme answer. And so the question I put on here, so he gives 2 answers. I kind of separate out the I am from the rest. Why is his answer much more meaningful than just a yes? And if it was a group, we'd pause and we'd wait for answers, but there's nobody here to ask. And so, like, do you know where these come from, like in the Bible? So the first one, the I am, is something we've read long ago. So this is from when Moses was 40 years old, and he was in Midian, and God spoke to him at the burning bush. And so this is the burning bush, so told to take his sandals off, standing on sacred ground. He was on Mount Sinai with the sheep. He's just kind of out there, and came over to investigate this burning bush. And God started to talk to him and told him that he was going to rescue his people out of Egypt, right? And then Moses, kind of strangely in this, suppose they say, who sent me? What's your name, right? And God's first answer is kind of funny, to be honest. It says, I am who I am. Or other translations would say, I will be what I will be, right? Which is that's like the worst fortune teller answer ever. This is what you're saying to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you. So I am is now one of the names of God because of this statement. And presumably God said it to Moses for a couple of reasons. One is you're going to decide who I am no matter what, right? So it almost doesn't matter what I say because you're gonna do whatever you do anyway. Another is you'll know who I am when you see who I am. Like, so we're on earth, we kind of see but a veil of things and fact and realities. We see people but trees, right? To steal another thing from out of Mark. But eventually we'll see clearly, right? We'll see face to face. And at that time, you'll understand who I am. So I can't really tell you who I am right now because it's going to take a while for you to get it anyway. So I will be what I will be. I am who I am, and you'll come to understand who I am at some point. And then God does go on to give him a less cheeky answer. He says that, I'm the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. So he tells them something that they can understand because his initial answer is just kind of funny. So Jesus' answer is the same, right? So he starts off with I am, which is kind of the cheeky soft reference, and then he gives a more definitive reference. And so the more definitive reference here, this Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven, comes from Daniel, right? So this is the official verse of the day. So Son of Man, this is the title that Jesus picks for himself. And so whenever he was on the earth and they asked, are you the Messiah? His go-to answer was that he referred to himself as the Son of Man, which comes from Daniel 7:13. By the way, you can see some examples of times where he did this in various places in the New Testament where they talk about the Son of Man. But this comes from one of Daniel's visions. So there's 3 Daniel visions in here that are about the 4 beasts. So they're described differently in different ways, but it's kind of like the lion, the bear, the leopard, and then the like super beast, right? So the 4 beasts and the 4 empires of the age. And then the thing that takes down these 4 beasts is, in my vision I looked up and there was one before me like the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven. And so you can see how Jesus, just to like remove any ambiguity, added this coming on the clouds of heaven. So he approached the Ancient of Days. The Ancient of Days is God. He approached God and was led into his presence. He was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. So Jesus, the Son of Man, whoever the Son of Man is, has sovereign power, which is significant. All nations and peoples of every language worship him. His dominion is everlasting. It will not pass away. So this Son of Man, which you could argue is not just Jesus, but actually God's holy people, right? So we'll get into that. But it's what all men were called to be. But Jesus is the only one who did it, right? Is another way to do it. The actual Aramaic that was here, this one was in Aramaic, is Bar Enash, which actually does just mean human being. But we actually translate Daniel 7:13 because when Jesus quoted it, he said Son of Man, when really it just means human being, right? I looked and there was one like a human being coming with the clouds, and so we translated to Son of Man. Tom Constable, somebody that I listened to a lot in preparing for this, he has a nice little description here. You can pause it if you'd like, but it's kind of like his statements about Son of Man and what that title really represented. And so before we move on past this, we'll just kind of give you a little bookends on the analogy. So imagine you're in 1977, which by the way was the year I was born. And it was 1 year before Star Wars came out. So there's no way you've watched it because Star Wars hadn't even been released yet, right? Or you're in a group that's just never heard of Star Wars. But I decided that time traveling you back to 1977 was probably more likely than you being in a group of people that didn't know anything about Star Wars. And you said to this group, and you just said, "I am your father." And what would they think you meant, right? First they'd think you were crazy, and then they'd just be like, "What?" Because there's no context, right? And so that's kind of the analogy here is, why is it important to understand the Old Testament? And so one of the reasons is, if you really understand it, you'll really understand what Jesus was saying. And so this statement that Jesus answered here, he's actually saying who he is. I am the Son of Man. I am the Messiah. I am the Holy One of God, right? Like, that's me. And he's also, if you know the story well enough, he's calling Caiaphas, effectively, he's calling him the Antichrist, which is not good. He's calling him the fourth beast, the super beast. It's pretty insulting. And he's describing where in the story we're at. We're at the point where the rock is going to crush you to dust, right? And so if you were Caiaphas and you were just called the Antichrist and you were just told that this is the point in the story, and then you will see, so here's what's about to happen, this is where we're at in the story, you would tore your clothes too, right? If you actually understood this sentence the way Caiaphas did, right? And so context is important. And you can see that reading the Old Testament is important because you can really understand what Jesus is saying quite a bit better. Cool. Oh, a bonus verse of the day. I had to put the Son of Man reference as the verse of the day, but I thought I would also put a bonus on here just because Daniel's so good. So this one is from Daniel 12, so the final chapter. So at that time, Michael, Daniel, by the way, names two angels. He names Gabriel and he names Michael, and he says, Gabriel, come back. I don't think that they're mentioned before this, but mentioning angels by name, that's the level that Daniel's at, right? So I'll skip over some of this. But at that time, everyone whose name is found written in the book, so the book of life, there's a couple of different books of the living, book of life is one, they will be delivered. Multitudes who sleep in the dust of the earth will wake, some to everlasting life, others to shame and everlasting contempt. Interestingly, the Old Testament rarely ever talks about everlasting life. It talks about blessings, which is what the Jewish people were after. But Daniel really brings this everlasting life idea to the forefront in the Old Testament, and I think he's the first one that really talks about everlasting life as being a thing, right? You can go on and you can read these, but you should roll up and seal the words of this scroll until the time of the end. So pretty serious. And many will go here and there and increase in knowledge. So it's a little hard to read, right? And Daniel gets picked up on by Jesus, and Daniel gets picked up on in Revelations. So for example, this roll up and seal the words of the scroll. Then you read in Revelations, I watched as the Lamb, who's capitalized, presumably that's Jesus, broke the first seal and began to unroll the scroll. So this is a lot of connections between Daniel, Jesus, and the book of Revelations. It even talks about then one of the four living beings, which Daniel's all about these four beings, which we'll see a lot. So really central stuff to trying to understand prophecy, right? Without a doubt, instead of listening to me, you should go watch the Bible Project video. They do a really nice job, and what I think they do a super job of is helping you get the big picture, right? So in 8 minutes or whatever. So I'm not going to pause it and go watch it, but I've watched it, I don't know, plenty of times. They also provide structure to the chapter. It's nice to have structure because when you're dealing with prophecy, having something that you can use as a scaffolding to start learning more about really helps a lot. So I'm just going to kind of summarize a couple of things that you hopefully learned from that video. So Daniel is a unique book because it is written in two different languages. It is written in Hebrew for chapters 1, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So 6 of the chapters are Hebrew. And then there's 6 that are also Aramaic, which is 2 through 7. They're written not necessarily in chronological order, mostly in chronological, but not perfectly. But they're written so that you can understand different themes, right? So the way the Bible Project has done it is they've kind of got 1, 3, and 6 form a theme that's standing up for putting your trust in God and the hard times. So the fiery furnace with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, Daniel in the lion's den, eating the vegetables in the water, right? So that's kind of a theme. There's a theme of King Nebuchadnezzar and then his maybe grandson, Belshazzar, and the writing on the wall. I'm guessing everybody's familiar with the phrase, the writings on the wall. This is where it comes from. And then, so this kind of forms a theme, and then these two form a theme. And then these two form a very strong theme. So Nebuchadnezzar's dream about the statue, the head of gold, the arms of silver, and you get it, bronze and then iron. And then Daniel's version of that same information, but in a different fashion. And then this is the Aramaic like six-pack, right? And so these, like even I, who dense as a box of whatever, can see the pattern and parallelism in this, right? And then it comes back to Hebrew for 8 through 12. And this is Daniel's second vision, where he gets more details about these beasts. It says Persian and Greek. Really, at this point, they were called the ram and the goat. So kind of getting more clarity on these. Chapter 9 has Daniel's prayer, and then the 77s. We'll talk about the 77s. And then 10 through 12 is the third vision, which is very, very specific. Right? Like it says Greeks, right? Like in there, they take over in 333 BC, and this was written in like 553, so like over 200 years earlier. He identifies them as Greek, even, right? Which causes a whole bunch of problems for secular people. But yeah, that's how this thing goes. And so totally worth reading in detail, but I'm going to try to give you my like overview. By the way, you could also break it up in terms of what's historical and what's prophecy. And interesting, 1 through 6 is kind of the historical parts, and then 7 through 12 is the prophecy part. And I think that if you were just reading it on your own, you would probably make that division because it's 6 and 6. But if you look at it closer, and the language that it's written in as a hint here, you can see that it actually structures in more meaningful ways than just historical and prophecies, right? So, but that's definitely what people would have seen at a first glance is those two divisions. Just kind of looking at the people, looking at different things. I'm not sure this is in any good order. The video hit on this, so I'll just kind of mention it. But Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So these are the 4 people that come that are taken in the first wave. So there's 3 waves where people go into exile: the 605 wave, the 597 wave, and the 586 wave. So the 3 waves. This is the first wave. These are the first people. This is like the ruling class and the very best artisans, like the cream of the crop. They take off of Judah here. And these 4 go. They're the top of the tops, right? So they're most likely princes. The connection isn't known for exactly what their lineage is, but they're princes of Judah, right? Their names are all interesting. So I don't know if you've seen this, but many Hebrew names have the name of God in them. Most commonly, it's El, which is comes from El just means gods, and then El means God, Elohim means gods or the one God, whichever way you want to do it. And so you've probably seen Nathaniel, Daniel is the one over here, Ezekiel, Elijah, Elisha, Samuel, Joel, Emmanuel, God with us is Emmanuel, right? And so all their names had some form of God in it. So you can see Mishael is who like God, God is my judge. Or the other way you can have God in your name is with Yah, for Yahweh. And so that can actually be pronounced different ways. So Jeremiah, Zechariah, Isaiah, Hezekiah, Hananiah, Zephaniah, Elijah this is a bonus. His name means like God, right? But it's like one and only God. So he took both of them and put them together, and that's how he got Elijah. So he's like super special. So their names are all changed, right? So these are their Hebrew names that all have the name of God in them. They were taken into Babylonian captivity. And they're like, we can't pronounce this, right? And we don't want you to be connected to your God. We want you connected to our God. So you're no longer that person. It's kind of like the old is gone, the new has come, except for that's not the way they felt. So they renamed them all, right? So Mishael, they're like, I can't pronounce that. You're going to be Meshach, right? So maybe the first syllable was kept here, but that was about it. And they put into their names the names of different gods. So Aku is the moon god, so Meshach. Azariah, so he got to keep like the A, and he got called Abednego. And Nego was one of the gods. I'm not sure what he was the god of. Shadrach, same deal. I must have been a hard H in Hebrew, which is like a sound, and they're like, that sounds like Shadrach to me. And so I can't pronounce that name. And so, yeah, Shadrach. And Belteshazzar, or Belteshazzar is another way to say it. Bel was their main god. Their primary god was Bel. And then these others are lesser god. Very appropriate that Daniel got the head god, and then these the other three got other gods. So it's kind of interesting. What makes Daniel so important? And so there's a couple ways to evaluate importance, right? So one way is perhaps how many times did Jesus refer to this Old Testament book, right? And so I went to a website just looking for like passages cited by Jesus. I went to like 10 of them, and all of them were different, right? So I just had to pick one. So I picked this website. So it seemed like it had quite a few. And it mentioned that there were like 6 or so places, 2 of which are this 7:13. I'm not sure why they list it twice on here, but they did. It must have been important, right? And so these different references, I guess it's actually just kind of doubled because they're mentioned. Oh, it's mentioned in Matthew and Mark. That's why it's doubled, probably. Maybe. Not sure. But at any rate, I was looking at how many times this website listed different books, like as in Jesus quoted from it directly. And so Psalms actually had the most on that website, followed by Isaiah. That kind of makes sense. Deuteronomy, so the sermon of Moses, and then Daniel, and then Exodus, and then there's a lot of 1s and 2s, right? And so it's just kind of interesting to see the references, how many times Jesus like quoted from books. It's also interesting to note that some of these ones that came up ahead of Daniel, these are big books, right? So like it's kind of not fair to compare somebody that's 5 hours long to somebody that's because it's 4 times longer, right? So I'm an engineer, so I was just being silly, and so I was gonna plot how long the books were, like how many words did they have versus how many times were they listed on this website as referenced by Jesus. I was having fun. All right, that's what I do. By the way, I noticed that there were 600,000 words in the Old Testament, and then about 180,000 in the New, so it's quite a bit longer with the Old Testament. And as I was getting into this data, I just really enjoyed looking at how we structure the books, like how the Old Testament books are ordered. So there's the Pentateuch, the historical books, the wisdom books, so wisdom books, I kind of split on my chart here. The major prophets. It's kind of neat that Daniel's listed as one of the 4 major prophets because he's so much shorter, right? So Isaiah, nearly 40,000. Jeremiah gets both of these books. You have to add them together, 45,000. Ezekiel, 40,000. Daniel, 11, right? So he's like a third the length of the other major prophets, but he's considered a major prophet by Christian tradition. And then there's the 12, so the 12 minor prophets are on here, so I just thought that's kind of neat. And if you order them by word length, you can see he pops in at 20th. So these ones, by the way, would be the biggest. Kings, Chronicles, and Samuel. If you combine them, they actually top Psalms even. But reference by Jesus per 10,000 words, Daniel way at the top, right? So you can see how I did my math here. So I was just being silly. I was trying to express quantitatively how you could say that Daniel was an important book based on like references by Jesus. By the way, some of the others, if you include all the 1s, actually come in higher because like Jonah is just so short, right? Mentioned one time Jonah. It's like the only prophecy that, or only sign that we shown them is the sign of Jonah. That one word by Jesus put it at number 1 just because Jonah's so short. and yet it was in there. Jonah's one of my favorite books, by the way. It's kind of like it's almost like the opposite of Christ in many ways, but it's just kind of interesting. Where are they at in the Bible is always interesting. So the Christian tradition puts Daniel in as the major prophets. So the Bible is a library. The library is divided by genres. The first genre is the Pentateuch. After that is the historical books. And you can see like where we even put the apocryphal books, like where would they be even? The wisdom books are next. Psalms is in there with the wisdom books. The major prophets and the minor prophets. Now, interestingly, Daniel, chapters 1 through 6, I'm sure they had trouble placing it because 1 through 6 are perfectly historical, right? And they should be after Chronicles, but before Ezra. Like they belong right there, right? And so that's just where they belong. So like you can see Esther came up here to the historical section because she's all history, but Daniel was actually put in the major prophets because of those final 6 chapters. And yeah, what wasn't even called a minor prophet, but a major prophet. It's interesting that if you look at the Tanakh, on the other hand, so the Jewish tradition, which break things into 3 pieces. So the teachings, so these are the books of Moses. The prophets, which is broken up into 2 pieces. There's the former prophets and the latter prophets. And then there's the writings, which is kind of like given less authority in their tradition. And Daniel is put down here in the writings. And so the question is, why didn't they elevate Daniel up to be a former prophet, right? So like Christian tradition does, right? Christian calls him a major prophet, but the Jewish tradition does not. And so trying to figure out why they do that is kind of interesting, and how does the tradition work. There's a couple reasons when I look online. The one that a lot of people go with is that it was added later, suggesting that it wasn't going to be added like necessarily at all until they saw how much of it was coming true, right? And so it was actually added to the Tanakh latest, being one of the last books in the Tanakh. And whenever it was added later, they couldn't really put it up here because like this part was done. Like it was like done when they decided to add Daniel at all, and so it got put into the writings here. Others is that it's like a technicality that he wasn't ever called a prophet, except for by Jesus, who the Jewish tradition, that's a reason not to include him, right? And so it is interesting that he is not with the prophets in the Tanakh tradition, and secular people view that as grounds to say that Daniel is a lie, right? It's kind of where they take it. And so I guess another way to view this is same information, just a different chart. So Daniel shows up down here in the writings, like towards the end of the writings, whereas we call Daniel one of the 4 major prophets. And here you can see prophets 1, 2, 3, 4, the majors, and then the minors all the way up to 12. Oops, forgot to put on the 10, 11, 12. So it's just kind of interesting. Mentioning the secular view of books, you can take this with a grain of salt, but it's interesting what has to happen to prophets in secular views. So secular views don't consider prophecy a thing, and if your prophecy is too good, they say that you were written later. That's just how it works. So, for example, Isaiah, there is a clear shift in the tone, starting with Isaiah 40. So the tone in Isaiah 40 is exile is over, right? Like it shifts in Isaiah 40. And then it kind of shifts to be even later in Isaiah 55. And I'm not saying that they're 100% chance all written by Isaiah. I think that they were still in a period where it could be edited. But secular people, there's no doubt to them, right? So this was written in the 8th century. This was written in the 6th century. This was written in the 5th century. And one of the big reasons for that is because they're too good, right? So I think that Isaiah mentions the name Cyrus, for example. And they're like, well, that's ridiculous to even consider that he wrote that before he could have even known the name Cyrus. And so they put him in the 5th century, because I think in this section is where they say the name Cyrus. And so I take the Reading the Bible class here at Earl Sullivan. and it's taught from a literary secular perspective. And so this was actually a quiz question, and it was matching, right? So you had to match these people. And so Isaiah 1 is kind of like considered like a book. And when was it written? And the correct answer is it was written in the 8th century. And then Isaiah 2 is like it's a book. And the correct answer on the quiz, if you want to get the points, you better mark that it's a 6th century prophecy. I thought about maybe I should just get a bunch of these wrong, right? Just like leave it blank. It's like no answer given, right? Isaiah 3, the correct answer was that it was a 5th century prophecy. And then Daniel is the funniest of all. Because his prophecies are so good, there is no choice but for secular beliefs to say that he was written 400 years later. Like there's no choice, right? And so the correct answer on this quiz, and you've got to mark it if you want to get the points, is that Daniel is a 2nd century apocalyptic literature, which looks like prophecy, but is actually just condemning Hellenistic aggression, right? So specifically condemning I forgot to say Antipas IV, Epiphanes, Antioch IV. I said it wrong. That's right. Christian tradition is that Daniel is a book written by Daniel himself, and the latest it could be written is around when he was older and died. And here's the link. So it was written in 540 BC. But I just think it's so funny that, to me, it's a testament to how clear his visions were, and nothing else. But yeah, they just had no choice. And in fact, like you go to Wikipedia, and they'll say, consensus of modern scholarship is that the book dates in this time period. And the reason they put it after 167 is because of the Maccabean revolt against Epiphanes, and they say that those things were so clearly written in Daniel that the only explanation that secular people can give is that it was written for the first time ever in 167. And that, by the way, also they have to push back when the Septuagint was translated to make this all work. Now, the thing they didn't quite, secular view can't quite explain is how the Dead Sea Scrolls came about, so at any rate. So the Dead Sea Scrolls obviously read Daniel, and they were before this time period. So somebody's going to go battle Wikipedia and use the Dead Sea Scrolls as evidence, but it's not going to be me, right? So I just think it's so funny. Most of these prophecies that the secular view really cannot handle is in Daniel's 3rd vision. So there's Nebuchadnezzar's vision, dream, and then Daniel's, I guess you should call them all dreams. I'm not sure if dreams or visions is the right word, but there's 1, 2, and 3, and in as little as 35 verses in Daniel 11, there's 135 prophecies that are all appear to be fulfilled, at least for the first time. And there's no choice but to say that it was written later. It's the only way. It's the only way you can justify what was written in Daniel, right? Which I think is just really fun. By the way, I should tell you the resources that I read this week that I was really enjoying to talk about the things in the slide. One is, of course, the Bible Project. I love their stuff. They've got a podcast that I listen to. Tim Mackey did a thing called My Strange Bible. He's got a 5-part series on Daniel. It's really good. I also listened to Tom Constable. I don't know if you've read anything from Tom Constable. He taught in Plano, Texas for years. He's passed away now. But they recorded like his classes there, right? So there's 16 audio files from their Sundays. I listened to them, at least 13 pretty well. There's also paper versions of those commentaries. The Net Bible includes his commentaries right on the side, so you can read the Bible and read what Constable said about it. His notes on Daniel are 245 pages. If that tells you the level of effort that Tom Constable has gone into to helping us understand these prophecies, really amazing stuff. So just print out the 245 pages, read them, and you'll be a lot smarter, right? This is just kind of a snippet. This one I grabbed from the Net Bible. So he kind of talks about the history and leads things through. There are a few things so history is based, it's kind of like science, right? It changes based on new evidence becoming available. And Tom Constable's information is a little locked in time. So if there's new scientific information that comes out, since his death, he won't be able to update it. But it's still like really, 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 really good. So I just thought I'd put a shout out to Tom Constable here. One of the things that Tom Constable breaks down really well, and I'll just kind of cheat and mention it here. I do this thing where I cheat and I put more important information first. I will do things in order, but I like to put most important information first. And one of the things in Daniel 9 is the 77s. So Daniel 9 is like the one chapter that is not one of these three repeated visions, right? And so it's like this vision, this vision, this vision, each time getting clearer. And chapter 9 is different. It's Daniel's prayer, which is really good. It's all about righteousness and why these things should happen because of righteousness. And then as a response, Gabriel comes and he gives him some more information, right? And he talks about how you could think of time periods as being 77s. A little disclaimer here. The word sevens in Hebrew is the exact same as the word weeks. So a lot of Bibles translate it as 70 weeks, but really it seems to fit better as 77s, which is another version of the word, where that sevens represents 7 years. So it's interesting that 70 weeks is actually 70 7-year periods. So at any rate, part of this particular message from the Lord, this particular prophecy, as a reminder, prophecy just means word from God. It doesn't mean future, but in this case, yeah, it does mean future. But he says, from the time the word goes out to restore Jerusalem, not the temple, but the actual city, like the walls in the city, until the anointed one comes, there will be 7 sevens. So this is the time period where Jerusalem is being rebuilt. The walls were done in 52 days, but it actually took 49 years, one Jubilee period, to rebuild the city. And then after that, there's 62 sevens, which is kind of weird. I think the point is that 7 plus 62 is 69. So it's like all but the last week, right? That's the time when the anointed one will be put to death. Based on my math, the Nehemiah goes to Jerusalem in 444. 69 7-year periods, it's like 490 minus 7, so 483 years. That puts you to 40 AD. Math, when you cross the 0, is annoying because there's no 0 BC, so it puts you in 40 AD, which is fine. I consider that close enough to AD 33, which is the year we understand as when Jesus was put to death. There's people that have ways to tweak it to get it even closer, but it doesn't bother me. His 77s, though, has 69 weeks, and then this is kind of confusing. Then there's a gap of who knows how long, an unknown length of time. We're in this gap, right? And then he talks about the final week, or the final 7-year period. So week number 70 is the end of days, right? And so you can see why, when you read Daniel, you can see why a lot of people thought Jesus was going to crush the Romans. You can see why a lot of people thought the world was going to end. So, for example, if you really read this, you would probably assume that from the moment Jesus died, I mean, some people got out their stopwatches, right? And right, they didn't have stopwatches, but they started a 7-year countdown, right? I think Peter was actually one of these. Peter didn't really have interest in writing a gospel because it's like, we got 7 years, people, right? But there's actually one thing that was hard to see in these prophecies is how long the unknown length of time would last. And we don't know. We don't have any way of knowing. Jesus didn't know. If Jesus didn't know, we don't know, right? But we do actually have a lot of information once the end begins. Man, these scrolls are going to get read like nobody's business. So it's just kind of an interesting thing. So yeah, you can see that Tom Constable has talked about when it started, how you get, he does have math that makes it hit 33 AD, or like right on the nose. I don't know if I agree with his particular math, but that's okay. And then there's the church age, and then there's the final week, or the final potentially 7-year period. And again, it could be so many weeks. I mean, there's so many interpretations of this, and we don't know. Right? It could be 7,000 years, right? We don't know, right? But it's really fun to think about. Just to also mention it, there's a ton of connections in Daniel to the Apocrypha. In fact, some of the Apocrypha books were written well before Daniel, right? And so people argue, it's like, well, why aren't these in the Bible, right? Because some of them are pretty good, right? And so there's the letter of Jeremiah, right? So we've got Jeremiah, the scroll, but this is not in the Bible. We've got the prayer of Azariah, or you know him as Abednego. So the prayer of Abednego is in the Apocrypha. So I haven't ever read it, probably should. These two books in Catholic tradition are actually in Daniel, right? So Bel, that was the god, and the dragon. Should probably read them. They're good and interesting writings. When Jesus, in that time period, referred to these books, Jesus read all of these, by the way, whenever they, or had them read to him, they referred to them as like wise learnings and wise teachings. And then when they referred to the Old Testament, they said, this is the voice of God, right? And so I haven't read them just because I haven't read the Bible good enough, but this is on my to-do list, right? And Maccabees, like you could read about this because this is the event that secular people, non-Christians, put Daniel after this event, because obviously it was foretold so clearly that Daniel must have been written after it, right? The goat. So the stories for this chapter, I always like to decide like what are the stories that we're going to talk about. It's really best broken down to these chapters, right? So chapters 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. You can lump 10, 11, 12 because they're all about the third vision. So I mean, you can look at this also in terms of themes. So these three make a theme of like trusting in God and standing still in the stream. The Aramaic six-pack, they make a very nice little linked six-pack coming across here. Reminds me of like the structure of the 6 days, although this one's a U shape, so down and back up. And then this little arc here is this dream that's repeated so many times. And the only chapter that's really not this dream, so there's Nebuchadnezzar's version, Daniel part 1, Daniel part 2. Here's where we have the prayer and the 77s. That comes in chapter 9. And then the third vision is here. By the way, just because I'm sure I'll forget to say it later, but chapter 4, most of chapter 4 was written by Nebuchadnezzar. Kind of an interesting little factoid about the Bible. I'm sure authorship isn't really known, but it's definitely written as if from Nebuchadnezzar himself after his humbling and return of his sanity, right? Just to kind of tell you where the dates fall in these. So some of them are chronological, right? So 605 BC is when they were taken. Presumably around 604 was when the dream happened that Daniel interpreted, where Nebuchadnezzar didn't even tell him what it was. That was this dream here about the statue. Nebuchadnezzar's super impressed that he could tell him what the dream was, even if he didn't really listen to the interpretation at all. After that, Nebuchadnezzar decided to build himself a giant statue. That's where the fiery furnace came in. And then there is a gap, right? So there's a 30-year time period gap here. Nebuchadnezzar has a dream about a tree, which is his personal fall. So there's references in here that go to Genesis chapter 1. He basically becomes a beast for a while, humbles himself, and then is restored by God. And this is the chapter that's written by Nebuchadnezzar. Another huge time period, so another 30 years. So there's like a 30-year gap here and a 30-year gap here. This is Belshazzar, and this is the writing on the wall, mene tekel parsec. You've been weighed, measured, and found wanting, right? And then that is the end of the Babylonians, right? Now, this next one is Daniel in the Lion's Den. We know that this is under King Darius or King Cyprus. We'll talk about that later. So it could have happened the same year even. We just know that it was after, right? And along the same lines, this over here, his prayer, happened in the first year of King Darius. So these two happen. I'm sure some people divide them, but they happen at roughly the same time. And then, interestingly, this is where the dates get a little crazy, right? So the next chapter is chapter 7, which is put here after chapter 6, but it chronologically happened like 15 years earlier, right? So you got to think in BC times. And it's put here to form this chiastic structure, right? So this chiastic structure, very common in the Bible, where things parallel themselves opposite. It's how we wrote back in the day, right? And the similarities between these two are unmistakable. The similarities between these two are unmistakable, and the similarities between these make sense because the other ones make sense, right? And then the rest of the book is Vision 1, Vision 2, his prayer in the 77s, and then Vision 3 at the end here. So pretty rigid structure, which helps us to understand it. I think the way that I would like to have it said to me, if I was doing it, might actually be along the theme lines. So it's almost like there's theme 1 here, which is like just literal events that you can understand. Theme 2 is showing the sovereignty of God with these two kings of Babylon, that are pretty easy to understand. And then the last one has to be this 4 beast, 4 kingdoms, more and more clarity as we go on. And then interestingly, this chapter right here, this is actually kind of a standalone chapter, but it's a super important standalone chapter 9 in there that doesn't truly fit this other theme, but we put it here because it's between 8 and 10, right? All right, so let's maybe look at locations next. I forget. We'll see this a couple times. This is timeline. This is what this is. So what you're going to see is you're going to see the head of gold. So you can see there's like a head of gold here. The chest and arms of silver. The belly and thighs of bronze. The legs and feet of iron, and then iron and clay. And then the stone, the rock, right? And Peter renamed rock. And so this is Nebuchadnezzar's version of it. Daniel's first vision, they are still the same 4 kingdoms: Babylon, Persia, Greece, essentially Rome, and then God's kingdom. But they are a beast instead of a statue. So it's a lion, but they're directly connected. A bear, which is kind of lopsided bear, Persia and the Medes. The leopard with 4 wings, the Speeds, and then the 4 people that would take over after Alexander the Great. The super beast, which is kind of like Rome and beyond, right? And then we can pretty clearly see what kingdoms are kind of being referenced here each time. By the way, there's also the second version of the dream where they're called a ram and a goat, but we'll get into that. And if you go on the internet, people love making these charts, right? And each one has its own little mini interpretations about like whether the legs of iron and the toes of iron and clay are 1 kingdom or 2 kingdoms. I hear they call it Europe. That's a stretch. I've never seen that somewhere else. But it's fine. They might be right on, right? And just how Nebuchadnezzar's went, Daniel's first vision, Daniel's second vision, and then Daniel's third vision. And in the third vision, they're not called beast or parts of a human statue. They're simply called Mede Persia, and they're called Greece. The only one that isn't spelled out is this one, which is kind of like Rome and beyond, right? But these charts are everywhere on the internet. They're super fun to see how nicely people lay it out. I gave the link there. Just a kind of a big picture on where we're at in the plan. So, I mean, we've been raising this Israel for quite some time. We're towards the end of Israel's life, right? Not really. Obviously, there's an Israel today. But this is the period of exile, obviously, so the 70 years in Babylon. And then these are prophecies of the entire Second Temple period, so the 500-year period that comes after exile, effectively, right? So that's where we're at. If you go look at the story, they have timelines. They listed as 605 to 536, and so it's about 70 years, right? So 70 years. 66 years under Babylon, so 6. Where's the other 6? I don't know. Daniel continued as an advisor into the time of King Darius, is what it says in the Bible, which we believe is actually the throne name. So Darius just means king, kind of like Pharaoh, of Cyrus. Different interpretations there, because it does say King Darius as opposed to Cyrus. And then the first group goes back in 538. As soon as Cyrus takes over, his policy is to send some people back. So the timeline for this, if you don't care about dates, you just care about empires. Assyria is gone. They got put down. They finished. Daniel was around when they got finished off, and Carchemish, I think, is kind of where the last straw was. They took over Nineveh in 612, so before any of this, they'd already taken down Nineveh, but they hadn't finished off the Assyrians by then. It took a little while longer for Carchemish to happen. After them is Alexander the Great, Cyrus with Persia, then Alexander the Great, and then the four people that came after him, the Hellenistic Empire, and then the Roman Empire. So it's funny, this is a timeline, but with empires instead. And we pretty much, these four beasts, like we're gonna talk about these four beasts over and over and over again, right? Other ways to view his timeline, this one's nice because it shows like when the statue dream happened, when the fiery furnace happened, when the tree dream, when they think it happened. Some of these we know, some of them we just kind of guess at. The reign of Nebuchadnezzar. Interestingly, we talk about Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar, but we never talk about any of these other people in the middle. Like, they're just really not that important. And interestingly, Belshazzar wasn't even number one in command. Number one in command was Nabonidus, who I don't even know, right? He's not in the Bible. The reason he's not in the Bible is because he's never in Babylon, right? He was always at war his entire time. So he was number one. Belshazzar was number two. And it's interesting, the Bible talks about if anybody can interpret these words, I'll make him number three in the kingdom, because he was number two, right? Which we only know historically. And that explains why he said that he'd make somebody number three in the kingdom, because he was two, right? And then this is when the first return happened, also in Daniel's life, and then his visions of the end. So far as we know, Daniel never returned, but we don't really know that much about the very end of his life, to be honest. A little background information. This time period is the 70 years in Babylon, which like everybody just knows, it's the 70 years in Babylon. That actually came from Jeremiah 25, right? So you can read this whole thing, super good. But these nations will serve the king of Babylon 70 years, right? And so I also really like how they describe Nebuchadnezzar as my servant Nebuchadnezzar will bring against them, right? So my servant. I think it's interesting that Nebuchadnezzar is called my servant. He's probably the person who killed the most people that's ever referred to by God as my servant, right? And I think that comes from the end of his life, but man, I'm not sure if I would have called him my servant at this point in history. I don't think many Jews would have liked that statement by Jeremiah. By the way, the 70 years, you can look at it as when the first deportation came to when the temple reconstruction began. That forms 70 years. Or you can look at it from when the temple was destroyed to when the temple was completed. It actually works either way, which is kind of crazy. So it's kind of like from the very beginning, this is the year Nebuchadnezzar took charge. This is when he took Daniel, to when Cyrus said, go home. So that's 70 years. Interestingly, it seems like that should be the 70 years we're talking about. But usually people like this 70 years better. This is the 70 years from when the temple was destroyed. And then it took them many years, for some reason, to actually complete the temple. We'll read about that in Haggai and Ezra. And there's a lot in there. But it took a while to finish the temple. And so either way, it's 70 years, no matter how you slice it. And so that 70 years, depending on which of the 70 you like, encompasses Daniel's whole life. So he is the 70 years, right? Now his prophecies, like I say, they last for another 400, 500 years, right? Even into, when Babylon falls. So Babylon was around in a certain time period. After them was Persia, with Cyrus and beyond. And then where the prophecies really get strong is with the goat, with Greece. And so the time of Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great died very young, so he died, I think, at like 30 or something. Conquered everything in only 4 years. So he's like a blip. He's this little bar in history, right? But what he did was had a huge impact in those 4 years. And then his kingdom was divided into 4 different kingdoms, kind of the best way to say it. There's Ptolemy in the Egypt area, the Seleucid period, And yeah, the prophecies go right through here, right? And there's so much history for people that like history. So locations, here was the Babylonian Empire, quite large. Here was the Persian Empire, even larger. So you can see that the Medians and the Persians, they were over here, and then they crashed over like a wave and took over all of the Babylon territories. So kind of interesting there. Prophets, you can see here's Daniel in Babylon. This the range where Daniel fell. Ezekiel, some people say he's before, some people say he's after, but they're contemporaries, right? Ezekiel talks about a Daniel. Some people argue whether it was this Daniel or not. I think it was, by the way. But that's kind of where we fall in the prophets. There's still more prophets coming later, which is kind of interesting. This chart shows the 3 exiles, the 605, the 597, presumably that was Ezekiel's, and then the biggest group, the final group, which did not include Jeremiah. Jeremiah did not go with them. He stuck around with Gladius or something like that to stay in Jerusalem until he was taken to Egypt, potentially against his will. Other locations, just to look at them here, this was where Nineveh was at. That was where their capital is, and then the capital is, of course, in Babylon after that. And Babylon is at war their whole existence, right? And they make it for less than 100 years. Here was the name I was trying to think of earlier. Antiochus. Shoot, I can't even say it right now. Also known as, he named himself Epiphanes. The people, which means like from God or something. The people named him something similar but different. There's a little bit of information here. One of his acts during what prompted the Maccabean revolt, just truly detestable. So I mean, he's one of the people that's kind of listed as like a prototype of the Antichrist. So desecrated the temple, obviously, set up worship of Zeus at the temple, would bring up a Jew a day and say, hey, will you pray to Zeus? And if they said no, he killed them, right? Sacrificed pigs on the altar. You name it, he did it. Largely historically, we think it was him venting. He had lost quite a few battles in Egypt. He'd lost some battles to the Hittites. And the only punching bag that he could defeat were the Jews, right? And he vented. So it's interesting whenever we talk about Antichrist and prototypes of this line. It's similar to, one way you can think about it, of the Christ is really it's like a job description that gets fulfilled out by some people over time. But then there will be one who will fulfill it. And if you remember the slide from previous weeks, we kind of were focused on how Elijah is where this came from. Elijah filled out the role, and then John the Baptist has the spirit of Elijah, and then this led towards the Christ filling things. And Solomon, just kind of the wisdom that Solomon represents, not what he actually did at the end, but the love that David showed. And then that other slide, we had Daniel on here too. And so Daniel is one who seeks and finds wisdom. And so Daniel also contributes to filling out the picture that is Christ. But the flip side of the coin is we also have another job description, Antichrist. And so there's a couple different names for Antichrist, but we've seen different people in history fill out this role as well, and we will continue to see people fill out this role. So Daniel talks about this. He's sometimes referred to as like the little horn in Daniel's prophecies, and so we can kind of see how Pharaoh, it probably happened before Pharaoh. I'm sure that maybe Lamech is who I should have listed as number one. Filled out the job description, and then Pharaoh fills out the job description a little bit more. Potentially, I just threw this on for fun. Jeroboam and others in the north might fill out this job role. Antiochus and I cannot say it. Epiphanes clearly filled out the job description of the Antichrist. Jesus himself says to Caiaphas that Caiaphas was filling the role of the Antichrist. That one's he's like a bonus, right? He wouldn't be in here because he's not an important ruler. He's only in here because Jesus said that he was the Iron Beast, right? Nero, if we study the New Testament, you'll see Nero. I had to put in this picture of this is the statue of Nero outside the Colosseum, looking at himself very exalted and godlike. Nero destroyed the Second Temple in 70 AD. He hung Peter upside down. He killed Paul. Fills out the role of the Antichrist. We'll learn about him later. You could even go so far as to say, again, this is not coming from the Bible, that Hitler fills out the role of the Antichrist. His persecution of the Jews, just in terms of numbers, are mind-blowing, right? Millions, right? And so there's an exhibit at the Indianapolis Children's Museum. It's got a butterfly on the wall, and like you see this one butterfly, and it says that this butterfly represents 5,000 people that were killed by the Jews at this time, and it's a neat exhibit. And then you realize that there's actually a second butterfly just a little farther away, and so that represents 5,000 more people. And then the wall continues, and you suddenly see that there's hundreds of butterflies up there for the million plus people that Jews that were killed by Adolf Hitler. And so, yeah, crazy. Prophecies appear to be fulfilled, like with epiphanies, even back here, but then they keep happening, right? And the Bible Project, I think, did a really nice job of showing this, and it suggests that we're not done yet, right? So countless others yet to come. Ezekiel called them Gog, right? So the people that fill out the role of the Antichrist, and then the Antichrist that Daniel refers to is the one that comes at the very end, right? So the final, the worst, filling out this job description. So there's some interesting parallels between this job description and how it's filled out and here, and how these prophecies are not just one and done prophecies. It's a cycle that keeps on happening and will continue happening. By the way, I was preparing this slide, and I had to go read, just because I was getting depressed, I had to go read Psalms 23. Let's see here. Where's Psalms 23 here? So I didn't put it in the slides. I should have, but I had to take time out, right? And so this is something that I read that helped me out. So the Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. So this is NIV. He makes me lie down in green pastures. So you're forced to have rest, and you can only have rest as a sheep if your shepherd's protecting you, right? That's the only way you get rest. Leads me beside quiet waters, and so forces you to stop. Refreshes my soul. So I needed a little soul refreshing. You think about the Holocaust for a while, and it gets you. Guides me in paths of righteousness for His name's sake. So you learn about right relationships. You learn about God. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, is kind of the version that I memorized. And I definitely could kind of feel the valley of the shadow of death whenever you keep looking at what's going on in this theme, right? I will fear no evil, for you are with me. You are sovereign, God, always through and through. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. So you're with me. Obviously a reference to the shepherd here. Kind of shifts. There's a shift here. This gap is meaningful. Shifts the analogy from shepherds to a host at a banquet. Is the shift here, and you can see translators, they get it, right? But they can't say it in words, but they can leave a little gap here, right? So to make you figure it out. You prepare a table before me. You're a host in the presence of my enemies. So even while we're here on earth, you anoint my head with oil. Obviously, the Samuel anointing kings. Jesus himself anointed with the perfume. We are anointed, right, by God, which is crazy. My cup overflows. Goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life. And then here's a reference to eternity. I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. So there's going to be some trouble in the earth, but we've got a shepherd and we've got a host, and it is God. So at any rate, I had to kind of take a time out whenever I was making slides, so I thought I'd take a time out and kind of mention that here. The book that I am planning to read next, I don't know if I can handle it though, It's man searching for meaning. It's a good thing that they should be part of everyone's knowledge, but it's a Jewish psychiatrist who was in the concentration camps that interviewed and talked to people. So the way he maintained his sanity is he continued to be a psychiatrist throughout the concentration camps. And he survived, so Viktor Frankl. And then he also followed up with people afterwards that survived, and he looked and compared what made people's able to handle concentration camps, and it's like whoa. So that's on my my to read list is Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. I was impressed. I typed in just the word man's. Try this. Type in just the word man's into Google, and like the first thing that popped up is this book for me, and it's like must be a really meaningful book for me to have never heard of it before this week. I probably had just didn't listen to it, but so I'll be doing that sometime. Other characters in the story, I got kind of off in my slide. So obviously Nebuchadnezzar, Belshazzar, and then this king that we don't even know about in the Bible because he was always busy fighting wars. He's like the dad who was never home, right? And so let's go through a couple of these stories. I know that I'm ludicrously long on time, right? Let's just kind of quickly overview them so that you could go look at them sometime at leisure. So 1, 3, and 6. So these 4 youths, so they're 15 years old, 16 years old, 20 years old. We don't really know. They're probably all different ages too. Brought, captured out of Judah, out of Jerusalem. So they broke the walls, right? They looted the temple in 605 even, right? So people talk about the end coming in 586, but like they were defeated in 605, right? And the cream, the princes were taken, and the guess is it took about 2 months. So they were taken from their home, their palace. They were shackled, they were chained. For 2 months, they went to travel to Babylon, and they were forced to go to college, right? So they were forced for a 3-year period to learn the history, the literature, the language. So if they didn't know Aramaic, they learned Aramaic, right? For 3 years. And if you look at what they did, it's a model for how you live in our world, right? And so they didn't throw a fit. They didn't say I'm treated unfairly. They didn't give up. They worked at everything they could do as if for the Lord, right? They graduated top of the class, right? But they also had a line that they wouldn't cross, and so they would come up to the line. And Daniel was the voice of the 4. When they wanted to not eat the food, they did it in a respectful way, right? Like they requested permission to not do this thing that would be an abomination. So they did not want to drink their wine. They did not want to eat their meat that was dedicated to idols. They asked for the line to be drawn there, and they were given permission to do that. So they were making choices in a stream of evil that are a model for us today, right? Fast forward this story, they are actually. So I'll go through this just a little bit here. They were actually. I'm gonna cheat and mention something from chapter 2. At Daniel's request, this is after he did the king. He had the king appoint Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over all the administration of all the province of Babylon. And Daniel himself served in the king's court. So this is important because this is the first wave, the 605 wave, that comes before everybody else. And these 4 guys are set up to be in charge. And it reminds me of like, in my Father's house there are many rooms, and I'm going there ahead of you to prepare a room for you. If it were not so, I wouldn't tell you so. But they're preparing room for the people that God's putting in his coat pocket, like in the words of Ezekiel, right? And so like these people are really important to God's plan and show the sovereignty of God. So they're the leaders. Like when you come over in the 597 wave, you're like, whoa, I recognize Daniel. He's like second in command. It's like, whoa, I recognize Hananiah and Azariah and Mishael. They're like the leaders in Babylon, right? So which is crazy. So then we come to the fiery furnace story. So this story is interesting because Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, I would guess they realize how important they are for protecting their people, right? And I would guarantee you that they have the mindset at some level of, I have to maintain my role for God's kingdom, right? And so, like, I cannot, mess up. I can't do something stupid. I can't get myself killed. And they're like, I don't want to say they're walking on thin ice, but they are very careful not to rock the boat, right? And then along comes some line that they are not going to cross. So they're told they have to worship an idol, and they say, that's a line we're not going to cross. And so they put at risk everything that they were, right? Everything that they were protecting. And they put their trust in God, right? And so they risk everything by putting their trust in God. And you can see how God chooses to show us how that is a good plan, right? And so he's with them in the furnace, just like he's with us. And in their case, they walk out of the furnace, not even smelling like smoke, right? So that's chapter 3. Many years later, so I forget how many years later, there's a different empire. So, like, you wouldn't connect these stories chronologically if you were watching it, but we can see it. So a different empire. The Persians are now in charge. King Darius, he makes a rule that for 30 days you can only worship him. Maybe it was 30. And Daniel, that's a line Daniel's not going to cross. He's much older. Potentially the other three are no longer present. By the way, it's interesting that Daniel wasn't present in this one. He must have been out of town, right? He was number 2 in the empire. He probably just wasn't there, right? So for whatever reason, God made it to where he wasn't there. But then Daniel is the only one here, and he's thrown into a lion's den. He continues to pray to God, and there's a rule with the Persians that I won't get into, where once you make a law, you can't revoke it. Darius, who's probably Cyrus, didn't revoke it. He sent him in there, but he came to him the very next morning, and then Daniel's exalted by God there. So very clear. It's the same story, right? And it really happened, and it's not a cartoon book, but it happens for the same reasons. And these things foreshadow the death of Christ, right? So you can see how these are not deaths that are back to life, but in a way they are, right? So the lions also represent chaos, and so God, I love petting the lion's head here, super fun. God makes order and protects Daniel from chaos. Lots of connections, by the way, throughout Daniel to Genesis 1, almost to the point where it really makes you wonder, because Genesis 1 is also connected to the Babylonian creation story. You can see clear connections there. Like, did Daniel write Genesis 1, right? So I don't know, but like, there's some clear connections to Genesis 1 that you should listen to Tim Mackey more about, right? So that one's a pretty easy one to understand, because there are events that happen in history. Here are the dates, and they make sense. Babylonian Empire, Persian Empire. Next stories, I almost hate calling them stories. Maybe records is better. Chapters 4 and 5. I'm going to gloss over these, not because they're not important, but because I'm already way past my time already, and I haven't even gotten to the heart of the book yet. Nebuchadnezzar has a dream, a second dream. The first one was about the statue with the 4 pieces. This dream is about a tree, and the tree is cut down, and there's the dew on the tree stump, but the tree stump could come back. And Daniel hears the story, and he's in tears and says, it's about you, right? I'm sorry that it's about you, but it's about you. And it doesn't happen that night, but 12 months later it happens. And so Nebuchadnezzar loses his sanity, is the best way to say it. He's metaphorically converted back to being a beast, right? So he falls back into chaos, as Genesis 1 would say. He does it for 7 periods of time. We have no idea if it's 7 minutes, 7 hours. Sorry, it's not minutes. 7 weeks, 7 years. Most people like to think 7 years. Some people see reasons for 7 years. But then he is restored. He humbles himself. He's later called God's servant Nebuchadnezzar, which is crazy. I mean, he's the one who sacked the temple, right? Who destroyed it. He actually wrote chapter 4. Like, if you look at the language in it, it makes it pretty clear, right? Now, people can obviously argue authorship just fine, But it says, I, Nebuchadnezzar, right? Very, very clearly. It's written in Aramaic. He would have spoken in Aramaic. You almost wonder if these 6 chapters are written in Aramaic just so that, like, his one could be in Aramaic and have it make sense, right? And so it's really interesting that there's a chapter written by Nebuchadnezzar in the Bible. So Daniel chapter 4, right? Parallel story, 30 years later, grandson's nephew, I don't really know, Belshazzar, number 2 in the country, because the king was always off fighting wars, throws a banquet, sees a vision. The vision is written in Aramaic on the wall, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Parsin, which is actually hard to read because Aramaic, just like Hebrew, they're like sister languages. Like most of the letters are the same. There's no vowels, right? And so it actually could have been translated to Mina, Mina, which is just a coin, shekel, and then I don't know, talon maybe, right? And so it's almost like nickel, nickel, dime, quarter. It's like, why does the wall say nickel, nickel, dime, quarter on it? But nobody can determine what this vision means except for Daniel. And Daniel comes and interprets this as you've been weighed in the balance and found wanting, right? So there's different translations of it, but that's the idea. By the way, it reads from right to left. Aramaic and Hebrew both do. So Mene, Mene, Tekel, Parsin, or something like that. And so it's really interesting. And even though it was written, that's what was written on the wall. They spoke Aramaic, but it's hard to tell what it is without the vowels because the words could be multiple words, right? We struggle with the same thing in Hebrew and Aleph as well. I won't get into that. But Daniel comes and interprets it. And it happens that night. He does not humble himself. So the biggest difference is humbled himself and restored, does not humble himself and assassinated, right? So you can see what the Bible Project's doing here. So it's like restored and assassinated, right? And so that's the 2 parallel stories, and that's Daniel chapter 5. That's where we get the writing is on the wall, right? From this point on, the Persians are now in charge. And that's where we get the lion's den story from the Persians. So the Persians worshipped fire, so they didn't throw people in the fire. They fed them to the chaos beast, right? The lions. Brings us to the last thread, which I'm not planning to do justice to. Just going to kind of mention them. Nebuchadnezzar's, Daniel's vision 1, vision 2, vision 3, and then the prayer and 77's in the middle. So the dream of Nebuchadnezzar is about the head of gold, which is the Babylonians, the breast and arms of silver, belly and thighs of brass, legs of iron, and we believe that we can map these, but it's even easier than that because Daniel 11 spells it out, at least for beast number 2 and 3. He spells out right now that this one is Nebuchadnezzar himself, right? Never really says who the legs of iron are, but it makes a lot of sense for it to represent the Roman Empire. Super good references out there about this. This is one that I grabbed from another book that I like. These actually I'm allowed to reuse, which is fun. So it describes what the head of gold is and gives the historical background. The arm and chest so the 2 arms, the Persians and the Medes, later described as a bear, a lopsided bear because the Persians were stronger, with 3 ribs. Lots of interesting things in here about this. And then the thighs of brass, so gold, silver, brass, decreasingly precious metals, right? Lots of things going on here. Alexander the Great is the next one. He's later described in the next vision as a leopard, and then the legs of iron. And then where this story goes to with Nebuchadnezzar is it talks about a rock that's cut out of stone by no human hands. Like it's very clear that this is God cut out this rock. And throws it at the statue, and then it builds up to make a mountain, and then there's nothing left of the statue, right? Which you can kind of see why, when people were waiting for the Messiah, they were expecting the Messiah to destroy the Romans. You understand the messianic misconception when you read Daniel. So yeah, I see your point. You also cannot miss the fact that one of the 12 apostles, perhaps the chief apostle, was Simon, who we know as Simon Peter, and Peter means rock, right? So Jesus called him Peter, the rock, right? So some clear references to Daniel going on here. There's also some clear references to Joseph about how the dreams have the same meaning to show the certainty of what's going to happen. And also in this Joseph story, it's 7 cows, lots of sevens. Sevens, the Bible likes sevens, right? 7 years, right? And so the parallel one is Daniel's version, so the king's version, the Daniel's version. In Daniel's version, it's not a man, it's not a statue, it's beast, but it's clearly the same. And you can kind of see why Nebuchadnezzar would think of it as being like man, and Daniel would see it as like beast. Perhaps beast is the better symbol. And then this is where we get 7:13, the Son of Man sitting next to the Ancient of Days. And so the time at which the Son of Man is elevated is the time at which the super beast is going to fall. So the super beast that Jesus encounters is Caiaphas, and he calls him the super beast. And the way that he's going to overcome the super beast is by dying, which is not what people were expecting, but that's how it is. Other things in here, I just wanted to shout out to chapter 9. Chapter 9 is Daniel's prayer, which is really all about righteousness. So here's the analogy on this one. It's really good too. So what is righteousness, right? So if if a parent is trying to like guide their child, and the child does something good, righteousness is clapping, right? Cheering for that little guy, right? If you're a teacher and you're teaching, righteousness is to make clear explanations and not try to confuse them. If you're a judge and you have somebody who's innocent, righteousness is to set them free. But along the same lines, if you're a judge and you see beyond a reasonable doubt somebody did it, righteousness is sentencing to punishment, right? Justice is another way of righteousness. And so Daniel's prayer here, first he confesses, which, I mean, he himself really hasn't done anything wrong, but he's part of a people group that have. And he says that your righteousness brought us into exile. And along those same grounds, because of your righteousness, restore us, right? And so you see these repeated words. And so this is this prayer of righteousness. I was thinking about this prayer, and it's like, what would righteousness mean being applied to our day? It's funny, my first thought was like, I think righteousness would be like send in some more prophets. And then later in the chapter it says that we're going to seal up prophecy. It's like, I guess not going to happen after that. So I guess if we were to pray for righteousness right now, moving on. So at any rate, this is also where the 77s comes from, which we've kind of already talked about. It's a timer that starts from when word goes out to rebuild Jerusalem, which different people see that differently, but a lot of people consider that to not really happen until 444. So not when the temple was to be rebuilt by Ezra, but when Nehemiah was sent. Whenever word went out, said Nehemiah go. For some reason, that event started a clock. Kind of weird. That had these sevens in it, right? By the way, you'll notice that Tom Constable didn't have it work out to be 40 AD or 39 AD. He had it work out to be 33 AD. And I do not agree with this. I don't agree with everything that Tom says. But it turns out their calendar only had 360 days in it. And so really, 485 years times 360 days would have worked out differently, because the number of days would have actually taken you to exactly 33 AD. No, not going there personally. But I just thought I would tell you what Tom Constable's math led to exactly 33 AD. Personally, I don't see any need to adjust it that way. I don't think that the prophecy has necessarily been fulfilled. I think it's going to keep getting fulfilled in different ways, right? Like, I bet that you could fulfill it in a lot of different ways. I really, the Bible Project resonates with me yet again here. I think that it was fulfilled by I was trying to say his name again. Epiphanes. I think it was fulfilled potentially in the killing of Peter, right? So 1 week after Jesus dies. I think that there's a lot of different ways that it's fulfilled and will be continued to be fulfilled. The super beast is a job description, right? So that people continue to fill. But you can definitely see how chapter 11 maps just very nicely. And that's the end. Woohoo! So here's some of the questions that we would have asked and tried to answer, but I don't think that there was any chance that was going to happen because this chapter is humongous, right? It's really interesting. The Bible Project lays it out really nicely. If you want to actually get the most out of this, the recommendation I would make is to listen to Tom Constable's stuff. I think it's really good. What I chose to do is I chose to just have the Bible open when I could and listen through his audiobook. So I listened through these 16 Sunday school lessons, and I really got a lot out of it. So I recommend you do that. You can also, if you're the reading sort, you can print out his very long PDF. I'm not the reading sort, and I'm sure that you'd get a lot out of it. I'm not saying that he's nailed everything there is to know about Daniel's prophecy, but man, why wouldn't you start with Tom's explanations and then try to extend on them in your own ways, right? All right, so hopefully you enjoyed learning a little bit of the gory details that I've enjoyed in chapter 18. If you didn't want the details, that's fine. The goal of this book is to make it your first reading of the Bible, but really at some point you should just fall in love with this thing because the connections and the meaning and the understanding of where we're at and why we're here, it's not across the sea. It's sitting in your hand. So try to take some time to dive into it. All right. See you next time for probably Ezra next week is my guess. Bye.